What's up, guys? This is part two of our series in Luke. Today, we're going to be going over the birth story of John the Baptist, and this is going to be the first section of that. And we're going to learn quite a bit of new things. We're going to learn about different characters. We're going to learn about what priests are, what atonement is, and what type of sacrifices priests did, and what they mean. And so this is going to be a really cool part to tune into. Um, like I said, we are going to be diving deep into scripture with Luke. It's going to be a multi-part series. And so I'm excited. And if you are back for part two, welcome and thank you for coming back and being hungry and thirsty for the word of God, because I am as well. All right, we're going to get into it. I'm going to read verses 5 through 13 first, and then we're going to go verse by verse and just break this whole passage down. Okay, it says, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and they were both advanced in years. Now it happened that while he was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of this incense offering. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the altar of incense. Zacharias was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John." We are going to start in verse 5. And it says, in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, there was a priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And so we are introduced to three key players in this first verse, and we're going to go over who these people are. And so if you're looking at the notes, I try to coordinate um, verses that are specific to what point we're learning and who we are learning about. And so it'd be easier to follow along. Okay. So this first person that we learn about in verse 5, it says, in the days of Herod, king of Judea. And so this kind of sets the stage of where we are. Okay. And so we know that Herod ruled between 37 BC and 4 BC, as we have in point A. Okay, he was presumed to be the king of Judea and not over all of Rome. Sometimes we think of Herod as someone who was all powerful, but Herod was something called a client king, which we have right here in point B. And so, a client king was a ruler who governs a region, and Herod's region was Judea. Independently, he ruled over Judea in the day to day affairs, collecting taxes, making sure there was order, but does so under the authority and the approval of a more powerful empire. And this empire was Rome. Okay, so if you can picture what 37 to 4 BC would look like. Okay, so you guys have this person, this client king who's ruling over this region. He has you can say a quote unquote boss that he answers to, the person who is over Rome, but he's over this region, and this dude is not a good person. Okay, he's not a good king. He's not a good client king at all. All right. Here's relationship. So if you can think of kind of what a client king is you could think of Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. It has its independence. However, the real power and the final decision still belongs to a larger empire. And so I mean, I wouldn't call the United States an empire. However, like their president is the president of the United States. Okay, so even though they have independence, they're part of the U.S. and they can't make any final decisions um, without the United States as a whole. Does that kind of make sense? Hopefully. Here is seen in Matthew, and which is another gospel, and he kills all the boys in Bethlehem. And so Bethlehem is where Jesus was born. Okay, and so Herod was afraid a new king of the Jews, Jesus, would threaten his power, his client king power. And so he was like, let me wipe out all these kids that are being born around his age so I have no one to go against. And so this kind of plays back into in our first video how we said expectations versus reality. So even Herod's expectation was Jesus was coming to be a earthly king that was going to sit on the throne and take over, and Herod was going to get pushed to the side. Okay. And so, as you can imagine, I mean, somebody killing all these boys, these young boys that were being born around his age, around Jesus' age, just because he was afraid of his power being taken. Um, that is someone who is not a good king. Okay, so that sets the stage of where we're at right now. Okay, so we're in these days. We have this terrible leader in Herod, and it says there was a priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah, and this is the second key player that we are going to learn about. That's highlighted in green right here. And so, who is Zacharias, and what the heck is the division of Abijah that we see in verse 5? Okay, so Zacharias was a priest in Israel who served in the temple of Jerusalem. What are the divisions of priests? All right, so this was something that I had to look actually more into when it is talking about divisions. Okay, so if we go back to the Old Testament in First Chronicles 24, divisions were created for organization because there were too many priests that were serving. Let me back up actually a little bit on what a priest is. And so a priest was someone who could go in the presence of the Lord and make a sacrifice and atonement for the people's sins, and so they can have a relationship with the Lord. And so these people were called priests, and these people were declared as righteous people who would walk with the Lord. Okay, so Zacharias held a high role. He was one of the people, one of the priests in Jerusalem who were able to go into the presence of the Lord and make sacrifices in order for the people to be heard, and so they would have a relationship with them. Okay. However, like I said, there's this whole thing of divisions of priests. So there were like hundreds of priests, and there were too many, and so they had to make 24 had to make different divisions, and there were 24 divisions. So the divisions rotated weekly so that no group received special treatment. And so they had different duties. Some of them would go in and make atonement for the people, but there was too many. Okay, each division served for 1 week, moving through all 24 divisions before the cycle began again. Okay, and so you had 24 different divisions, and if you want to go through what each division was called, you can flip back to First Chronicles in the Old Testament and go through every single division. Zacharias was part of this 8th division of Abijah, so he belonged to that division, and he was one of the priests that would go in and make sacrifices for the people. Okay, so we just went through two of the players. So in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, so we set the scene, what's happening. There was a priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Okay, we have a play on words right here. And I'm gonna read verse 6 as well, because we have some of the blue that's highlighted that's connected to Elizabeth. It says, they were both righteous in the sight of God. Zacharias and Elizabeth were both considered righteous, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord, but they had no child. Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. Okay, this brings us to our third player that we are introduced to in the beginning of Luke, through these first couple verses, and it is Elizabeth. Okay, and why does the verse say daughters of Aaron? Was Elizabeth, was her actual biological father Aaron? No, it was not. And so what does it mean when he says, and why would Luke put that in there, um that she was a daughter of Aaron? Why is that important at all? Okay, so that's our first point, daughters of Aaron. And so it's important, and Luke put that in there because he wanted to show connection to the Old Testament. All right, so Elizabeth's lineage is from Aaron, Moses' brother, who is the first high priest. Aaron and his sons form the beginning of the priestly line. Okay, so Luke is obviously wanting to make a comparison, um, and make it known that Elizabeth comes from a high lineage. Okay, so we have Moses and Aaron in the Old Testament. Um, and point two, it says the role of the high priest was to make atonement before the people of God. And so I said this word before, um, and just so we're clear, atonement, what it means is making things right after a wrong has been done. And so you can think of sin, being done. Something has to be made right when sin is made with the people, because God and sin, they don't coexist. Okay, so some sort of sacrifice needs to be made in order for that sin, to be made right. And it made the people, so the high priest would make an atonement, so the people would be in right standing with the Lord. Okay, three, Luke makes a connection from the first high priest to Jesus being the final high priest. And so, I mean, we can spend hours on the high priest and what the significance is to that. But this connection is, the gospel story is about the salvation story of the people and learning about who Jesus is. And so, what we have in the first verse is, it's saying that he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And it's important because Aaron was our first priest. Okay, he was our first high priest in the Bible. And what you will learn is Jesus becomes our final high priest. All right, um, because Jesus becomes the final high priest, and there's no high priest after him, because he was the final atonement. He was the perfect sacrifice to make, sins right and make you in right standing with the Lord. Okay, our fourth point is Elizabeth has spiritual credibility, and that comes from her priestly line. Okay, and like I said, her priestly line is from Aaron all the way up. Point B, Elizabeth's barrenness. Okay, verse 6, it says they were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. They had no child because Elizabeth was barren, which barren just means, she was not able to conceive and have a child, and they were both advanced in years. All right. So Elizabeth's barrenness, point B. Um, Elizabeth and Zacharias were both righteous in the sight of God and walked blameless in all the commandments. And so they were seen blameless, one, because Zacharias was a priest and Elizabeth was from a high, well known, credible priestly lineage. And so they were considered righteous. They walked with God, they held the commandments of God. And this is really interesting to me because the point right here, the little a, at this point, they were still under the law of Moses. And so when it's saying that they were walking blameless in all the commandments, that's important too, that they're under the law of Moses. So they're walking in right standing with the moral law, the ceremonial law, and the civil law. And this point right here, the last one that's in all caps, was something that stood out to me because sometimes I feel in our Western Christianity, we we believe that we are owed good things in our life sometimes, if we do good or if we love the Lord. And this is not always true. Okay. And so this point is faithfulness doesn't guarantee easy circumstances. They were both godly and they still suffered. Okay. These people were both godly and they still suffered in their barrenness. And this is important because we see characters in the Bible who, right here in verse 6, it says they were both righteous in the sight of God. Okay. And so Luke is declaring that these people followed God. Okay. They walked blameless, and Elizabeth was still barren. And barrenness in this day and age was um, considered bad. Okay, it was an honor to have kids. You were able to continue your lineage, but she still suffered, and the suffering won't continue for her. However, she still did suffer for a long time. Okay, it says that they were in their old age. They were advanced in years. We don't know the exact age they were, but I would imagine that Zacharias, when he's making atonement for the people, that he's also praying to have a child. Him and his wife are praying to have a child, and it hasn't been happening. And so they probably prayed for years for this happen. And and it's just a point to not be do not be discouraged if you are praying for something and it's not happening right away. I know that's easy to say, and I'm going through things in my life where I'm praying through things and I'm not seeing the results that I want, but that's okay because God is still good. I'm still hoping, and He's working out things to His will, and His will is better than ours. And so that's just a point that I wanted to make, that you being faithful, and we see this as in Elizabeth's life, is it doesn't guarantee easy circumstances. Life might get harder if you're faithful, but that's okay because God is still working. Okay, so that's our first couple verses, 5 through 7. We learned about Herod, the king of Judea. Where are we at? Where is this taking place? There was a priest. Okay, we learned what a priest is: someone who makes atonement for the people so they can be in right standing. And his name was Zacharias. He was of the 8th division of Abijah. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was from the lineage of the first high priest of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. So that's the connection we have to the Old Testament. And they were both righteous in the sight of God. They walked blameless to the commandments and requirements of the Lord, but they were barren. Okay, we talked about how even though we are faithful to the Lord, we might still suffer and still go through hard circumstances. And they were both advanced in years during this time when she was barren. All right, the second section is 8 through 13. And it starts out, and I'm just going to read it real quick. It starts out and it says, "Now it happened that he was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division." Okay, so now when it says that this verse 8 is about Zacharias. Remember, he is a priest, okay? And so he is performing his priestly service before God in the order of his division. And so it is Zacharias' turn to go make a sacrifice to the Lord for the atonement of his people. And so in verse 9, it says, according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Verse 10, and the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. And so I just want you to picture, okay? And so we have the temple, we have Zacharias, who's a part of the 8th division of Abijah, and he gets chosen by lot, okay? What this means is he just gets chosen by chance. And it was his turn, his priestly duty that week to perform the appointed orders of the priestly customs. Okay, so we have Zacharias, and he is going into the temple and he's making this atonement. He's making this sacrifice for his people, and this sacrifice is to burn incense. Okay, so Zacharias goes into the temple, and it says the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. And so let's picture a church, and your pastor walks in to the church, and he is making a sacrifice. He's burning incense, and all the people of the church are outside. They're on their face and they're praying. They're praying in this hour of the incense offering, of the sacrifice offering. So that's the picture that we have right now. That's what's happening in this verse. All right. And this leads us to our next point. Okay. The burning of incense. What is happening? Okay. My wife burns incense in the house and I hate it. Um, but this burning of incense has a different kind of meaning, and it's something really cool that I relearned, and I thought something that we should talk about. The first point is the burning of incense by the priest. It symbolized the people's prayers rising to God, showing reverence and seeking his presence. Zechariah is serving as the mediator between God and the people. And so, like I said, so you're picturing this scene, right? And so we have Zechariah, he's walking into the temple, he is doing he's making a sacrifice. He's the mediator between God and the people outside the temple, people on their face, they're closing their eyes, they're praying, and the incense that's being offered up, the smoke from the incense is a symbolization of the prayers rising and being heard by God. Okay, so the people that are praying outside of the temple, that is what the smoke from the incense is representing. How cool is that? I love that symbolism. Okay, and so we have that happening. Okay, we have that happening in verse 9. Okay, we have this person, we have Zacharias, who is faithful, a righteous man who is walking with the Lord. He's a priest. It's his turn of his priestly duties to make a sacrifice and be the mediator between God and the people. And so he walks in this temple. He's burning the incense. The people are praying outside of the temple, and this smoke is representing the prayers of the people going up to God. Okay, how faithful, how cool is that? That having faith that their prayers are heard and being answered. All right. Here's the fun fact. Also, here's point B right here under the burning of incense is each priest only got to offer incense once in their lifetime, if ever. Okay, the altar of incense was placed right in front of the veil that led to the Holy of Holies, where God's presence dwelled. So this is this is a very important moment for Zechariah. Okay, this could be the first time and the only time in his lifetime to where he's giving this specific sacrifice as the mediator between the people and God. Okay, so remember too, that we talked about in the first video, is Israel is praying for the Messiah because God has been silent for 400 years. Okay, so these people of Israel have been praying. They've been praying. They've been burning incense, and they're being faithful for 400 years. They're doing this 400 years. Sometimes it's hard for me when I'm praying, and it doesn't happen in a week or the next month. I'm struggling, and so just keep that in mind, right? So the people are praying for 400 years, and God has been silent. Okay, but they're still praying for a Messiah. They're still uh praying for one. Okay, Zachariah is praying for a child. Okay, remember, Elizabeth has been barren for years too. She's been advancing years. This is probably a prayer he's been praying every single day for years, for a long time, and God answered both at the same time. Okay, he answered the prayer of Elizabeth's barrenness and also the prayer of a Messiah that's going to return. And he spoke. He spoke to the people, and broke the 400-year silence. All right, so we gotten through a couple of the verses. We just finished off on verse 10. We kind of painted the picture of what's happening, what is a priest, what is atonement, and what is the specific offering of the incense, and what that means, what's the symbolism. And so that leads us into verse 11. And it says, an angel of the Lord appeared to him. So appeared to Zacharias. So Zacharias is still inside of the temple, burning the incense, a symbolism of prayer for the people. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him. Okay. Which I feel like, I mean, look at his reaction. It says, standing to the right of the altar of the incense, Zacharias was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. And I thought this was pretty interesting because sometimes, I mean, you hear these stories that, like, oh, I saw an angel, and I talked to an angel, of all these angel appearancing, and it's typically like this really good thing. Um, However, we don't see that from Zachariah. We see the emotions that when he first saw one, it said he was troubled. He was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. Okay, if you could think of like a moment where like you were scared and fear took over your body. Okay, this is what happened when he's in there. He's in this holy moment. He's only giving a burning of incense one time, and he looks to his right and he sees this angel figure, and he's in fear. He's like, probably like, what is happening? Okay, verse 13, but the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard, and your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. Okay? And that's what the story is about. It's about JBap, right? It's ultimately about Jesus, but it's about JBap, John the Baptist. This is his birth story. Okay? And so, like I said, these prayers are being answered right now. Okay, God answered both at the same time. He answered Zacharias' prayer probably for years, that him and his wife will have a child, and and this angel, who will learn who this is, um, appeared to him and promised that he's going to have a child, and that child is going to be named John, which will eventually be John the Baptist. All right, this next point is called the bridge. Um, and little a, it says Zacharias and Elizabeth received the first prophetic word in 400 years since the end of Malachi. Okay, they are the bridge between the Old Testament and the New Testament gospel story. Like I said before, there's been a 400-year silence, and now God is speaking through the angel and talking to Zacharias. So this is a huge moment. It's a huge moment in history, with Zechariah being talked to by the angel. They stand at the scene between two covenants. Okay, Zacharias is a priest of the temple of the old covenant, and John will prepare the way for the new covenant. And this is so beautifully woven within each other. this old covenant, and JBap, John the Baptist, preparing the way for Jesus of being the new covenant. Um, Earlier in this video, I talked about the high priests, right? So a high priest would make an atonement and be the mediator between God and its people, so they can be in right standing and have a relationship with God. But finally, Jesus will be our last high priest because he's the perfect sacrifice and he offers himself to die, and he's the final priest. Okay, and in him we have right relationship and right standing and access to God. Okay, and that's what was happening with the scene between the Old Testament and the New Testament right now is Zacharias is still acting out his priestly duties, making sacrifices, burning the incense, and being the mediator. But his kid John the Baptist is going to serve as someone who prepares the way for somebody where we don't need a mediator. We're able to go to Jesus ourselves and offer our prayers, and we are heard and we're listened to. The last point that I want to make before I wrap up is who is this angel? It didn't say his name. Later on in the verses, it will, and his name is Gabriel the angel. Okay. Zachariah was troubled and fear gripped him when he saw the angel. Like I said, seeing an angel back then is very different than what we probably picture is now, or the stories that you hear of. I sat down with the angel and I talked to them and it was beautiful. That could be true. However, when we look at scripture, it's something that's very different. Okay? It says he was scared because God's holiness and presence is so overwhelming in scripture. It's unexpected and far greater than anything a human can naturally handle. And so when it goes, um, when the angel is appearing to him in Bible times, people believe seeing God's presence meant judgment. Okay, seeing an angel can mean death. God's holiness was too great for humans to survive. So Zechariah could really be thinking like, oh man, I'm about to die. I'm in the presence of God. I'm in the presence of this angel who is a messenger of God. And as soon as I see him, he is going to see right through me and have judgment on me and die. And so this is a person named Gabriel the angel, and we see him a couple times within the Bible as a messenger, as an angel who has access to God and gives those messages to his people, and significant messages about John the Baptist preparing the way. And so those are the key points that we have for this video. There will be a part 3 that we'll go over. We only went over a couple verses today, I think 8 verses. And I just want to recap what we learned today. And so we learned about 3 specific people in the Bible. We learned about Herod, the king of Judea. He was a client king. Okay, he answered to Rome. He ordered to kill all of the kids that were around Jesus' age when they were born because he was afraid that Jesus was going to be this earthly king and take over his ruling. Okay, there was a priest named Zacharias, and he had a wife named Elizabeth. Um, Zacharias was from a division of Abijah, the 8th division, and within different divisions, they served in priestly duties week by week. There was 24 divisions, and this happened to be in this section. It happened to be his appointed week to carry out his priestly duties. We learned about Elizabeth, and she comes from a lineage of Aaron, who was the first high priest, and this lineage was a powerful lineage, and it made her credible. And these two things both made Zacharias and Elizabeth righteous in the sight of God. They walked blameless. And even though they were considered righteous, Elizabeth suffered through her barrenness, but she was eventually heard by the Lord. And an angel, Gabriel, appeared to Zachariah when he's in the temple. And we have this picture of the people outside the temple on their face. They're praying as the incense being burned, and the prayer is being heard by the people. And this angel tells Zechariah that your petition, your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and his son is named John. And we'll learn more about John in our next video. Thanks so much for tuning in. Um, I will link these notes so you are able to have them if you want. All right. See you guys next time.